Hello and most welcome to 1232 of the service. I will finish up what I almost finished in Heidegger 1231, and it's this Adam's Optics, a very interesting article. I will show to the camera. Adam's Optics. It is very good. He makes a very precise criticism of different authors. He sticks to the more realistic aspect. Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins are often mentioned. He wants there to be a real world, so to speak, sort of a chap, if you get my drift. And in this article, which I dealt with in 1230 and 1231, he was taking apart Lee Smolin, both pointing out what he liked and what he didn't like. And one of the more interesting conclusions is his Popperian view, that good theory, it is not absolute true. It is not the truth put in front of you. It is more or less a falsifiable proposition, something that you in some manner theoretically could falsify. A working hypothesis, if you want. And I think I pointed out there is a problem there, because we assume the laws of nature to be infallible. And this is a complete break at that. It is going from some sort of absoluteness to a practicality that is absolutely called for, absolutely a good idea to do. But we forget in the process that what we set out from the beginning. So we accept them as practicalities, but we still have the essence as of them being absolute. If you don't believe me, ask anyone. If they think that, if I drop a glass, a cup, will it not always fall to the ground? And I think today 100% will say it will fall to the ground. This is not what Adam Optics is saying. He's saying sometimes it could fall, sometimes it couldn't fall. So it's a bit of a confusion, more of a confusion than something wrong in the actual argument, I would say. See, I'm just going to go to the very end here. So, almost. Conclusion. Towards a better kind of myth. In a recent Guardian article, Philosophy Isn't Dead Yet, the philosopher Raymond Tallis, he praised on Time Reborn, identifying Lee Smolin as one of a number of thinkers engaged in a broader campaign to rescue contemporary physics from its floundering mathematical excesses. By relating it back to our everyday experience of reality. It is time, Tallis concludes, citing the physicist Neil Turok, to connect our science to our humanity, and in doing so, to raise the sights of both. I'm all for interrogating foundational assumptions in science. That's certainly how progress is made. I'm also fascinated by the question of how human experience fits into the grand scheme of things. But the idea that we should conflate these two quests is a great mistake, and is itself somewhat momentary and free of an appreciation of history. As a cursory glance at the study of mythology reveals, humankind has long attempted to weave our hunches about ourselves into our picture of the world. It is only in recent centuries that we have begun to learn from the shortcomings of these fledgling cosmologies, and to separate out what we would like to be true from what may actually be demonstrated. To try to return to a form of inquiry based upon what feels right is no novel innovation. It is a relapse into old habits. Of course, I can readily understand the temptations of Smolin's worldview. In the face of those who would seem to dehumanize our species in order to make us consistent with the laws of physics, here Richard Dawkins' phrase about our being lumbering robots springs to mind. It strikes me that Smolin is offering the precise logical opposite. He would humanize the universe, suffusing it with inner essences, granting it a kind of memory, and the agent-like capacity to interpret and answer questions posed by curious experimenters. But the trouble is, as I've taken pains to demonstrate, such talk is not science, at least not yet. In choosing to present his ideas in popular form before offering a rigorously falsifiable hypothesis, Smolin is speaking over the heads of his colleagues and attempting to set the scientific agenda by intuition alone. It is my view that if we were to forge some kind of neat and easily digestible picture of the world that encompasses everything from the success of physics to the existence of human freedom, then it must be read off from science and not used to direct it. This naturalistic approach is the strength of Dan Dennett's accounts of consciousness and free will, upon which I have drawn heavily in this essay. As well as James Ladyman's account of metaphysics, which I hope will be the topic of a future post. It is also, according to Joseph Campbell, a typical feature of traditional mythologies. The cosmological function of which has always been that of formulating and rendering an image of the universe, in keeping with the science of time. There's another article that's connected to this, mentioned in the previous by Adams Optics. It's good old Daniel Dennett, serious but not solemn, an article from The Guardian, and he's in this article talking about his latest book, Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking. It's a kind of greatest hits collection pieced together from mainly previously published work to present both a summation of his central ideas about meaning, consciousness, evolution and free will, and to share some of the philosophical tools he has used to craft them. After half a century in the field, I've got some tricks of the trade which I'd like to talk about, he says. His critics agreed, to the extent that they see him as a clever philosophical trickster. Yet time and again it seems the best way to understand Dennett is to understand why so many criticisms miss their target. The late Stephen Jay Gould, for instance, coined the shocking terms ultra-Darwinists and Darwinian fundamentalist to hurl at him. Yet Dennett has consistently resisted the crude extension of scientific thinking into areas where it does not belong. Nowhere is this more evident than in the issue of free will, which he describes in the book as the most difficult and the most important philosophical problem confronting us today. It's important because of the long-standing tradition that free will is a prerequisite for moral responsibility, he says. Our system of law and order our punishment and praise and blame, promise keeping, promise making, the law of contracts, criminal law, all of this depends on one notion or another of free will. And then you have neuroscientists, physicists, philosophers saying that science has shown us that free will is an illusion. And then not shrinking from the implication that our system of law are built on foundations of sand. Dennett argues there's nothing we have learned from neuroscience that undercuts the foundation for both the law of contract and criminal law. It is true that we do not have ultimate responsibility, because our choices are always, in some ways, the result of things we didn't choose. Such as our core personalities, and the values we have absorbed from our society and families. But we have enough self-control to make sense of the difference between the psychopath and the criminal murderer, the person who murders unwittingly in a sleepwalk, and the cold-blooded killer. That's the kind of free will we need and is worth wanting. Dennett worries that there is good evidence that promulgating the idea that free will is an illusion undermines just that sense of responsibility many scientists and philosophers are worried about losing. Critics maintain that Dennett's kind of free will, with its modest idea of enough, responsibility, autonomy, and control, is not really enough after all. There's a pattern here. The story of my life, as Dennett puts it. People assume unrealistic ideals of what free will, selfhood, or rationality are, and then gets upset when Dennett says, it is not that overwhelming, supercalifragilistics, expalidocious phenomenon that you thought it was. But it's still real enough. The problem is simply both free will and consciousness have, by my lights, inflated in the popular imagination and in the philosophical imagination, so anybody who has a view of either one that is chopped down to size is accused of wretched subterfuge, as Kant memorably put it. This can't be explained wholly in cold, rational terms. There is also an emotional stake that philosophers often have and betray in their argumentation, which it's dangerous, also even verges on offensive, to draw attention to. I see what I think is white-knuckled fear driving people to defend views that are not really well motivated, but they want to dig the moat a little further out than is defensible, because they're afraid of the thin end of the veg. Some, however, accuse the new atheists of being motivated by fears and less than generous prejudices of their own. The most serious charge is that they attack the most simplistic forms of religious belief. And leave the most intellectually subtle versions untouched. Dennett acknowledges there's some smidgen of truth in that, but insists they bring it on themselves by changing the rules and shifting the goalposts. You ask them, what do you actually mean? What do you actually believe? but the real claim won't sit down and be examined. So after a while, you get impatient with that. I have made a concerted effort over the years to understand sophisticated philosophical theology. And have never come up with anything that I thought could sit in the light of day and be defended. He also points out the spokespeople for religion who chastise the new atheist for this Philistine dismissal of their sophisticated work are not speaking for your average churchgoer. Certainly not. In the United States. He may not be crudely scientific, but it is true that these days Dennett spends more time around scientists than other philosophers. I find the discoveries in those fields mind candy, just delicious, he says. If I go to a scientific conference, I come away with a bunch of new things to think about. If I go to a philosophy conference, I may come away just having learned 4 more wrinkles in the debate about something philosophers have been thinking about for all my life. But Dennett also maintains that we need philosophy to protect us from scientific overreach. The history of philosophy is the history of very tempting mistakes made by very smart people and if you don't learn that history, you'll make those mistakes again and again and again. One of the ignoble joys of my life is to watch very smart scientists just reinvent all the second-rate philosophical ideas because they were very tempting until you pause, take a deep breath and take them apart. Ridicule and misrepresentation are in some sense an occupational hazard for the philosopher. The best philosophers are always walking a tightrope where one misstep either side is just nonsense. He says, that's why caricatures are too easy to be worth doing. You can make any philosopher, any, Aristotle, Kant, you name it, look like a complete flaming idiot with just a slightest little tweak. His courting of a popular audience also unfairly undermines his credibility in a profession that has little concern or sometimes even respect for the wider public conversation. His often breezy tone only makes it worse. They want you to take it seriously. He mocks in a suitably pompous voice. I do take it very seriously, but not solemnly. Dennett is also unshamedly expansive in a way that goes against the academic grain. Trying to paint the bigger picture of the biggest issue of the day. In contrast, he believes one of the real problems in philosophy is that people can be a little bit myopic. The nadir of this narrow insularity came while Dennett was a graduate student in the 60s. It was comically cautious and unambitious. The very idea of trying for a large view of anything. This was miniature little piecework stuff. I thought it was dreadful. Public intellectuals can come in the role of the helpful clarifier or the challenging provocateur. Dennett sees himself as the former. Sometimes quite taken aback that people are so provoked. His best explanation for this is that a lot of what he does is about dissolving the mysteries that surrounds ideas such as selfhood and consciousness. I think the people who don't like magic tricks explained to them are also the people who don't like free will explained to them, or consciousness. How rude, how Philistine. To explain to even try. How dare you? But Dan dares, and like what he says or not, few do so with such intelligence, insight and flair. Mhm. Daniel Dennett. Mhm. I think it could be a good idea to add also the attacked article by Raymond Tallis. At the end of the article of Adam's Optics, Raymond Tallis wrote that he was very busy at the very publication of the article and he could not reply. Some years has passed and there doesn't seem to be a reply coming. Philosophy Isn't Dead Yet by Raymond Tallis. Far from having replaced metaphysics, science is in a mess and needs help. Einstein saw it coming. This is also from The Guardian. In 2010, Stephen Hawking in The Grand Design announced that philosophy was dead. Because it had not kept up with modern developments in science, particularly physics. He was not referring to ethics, political theory, or aesthetics. He meant metaphysics, the branch of philosophy that aspires to the most general understanding of nature. Of space and time, the fundamental stuff of the world. If philosophers really wanted to make progress, they should abandon their armchairs and their subtle arguments, wise up to maths and listen to the physicists. This view has significant support among philosophers in the English-speaking world. Bristol philosopher James Ladyman, who argues that metaphysics should be naturalized, and who describes the accusation of scientism as a badge of honor, is by no means an isolated case. But there could not be a worse time for philosophers to surrender the baton of metaphysical inquiry to physicists. Fundamental physics is in a metaphysical mess and needs help. The attempt to reconcile its two big theories, general relativity and quantum mechanics, has stalled for nearly 40 years. Endeavors to unite them, such as string theory, are mathematically ingenious. But incomprehensible even to many who work with them. This is well known. A better kept secret is that at the heart of quantum mechanics is a disturbing paradox, the so-called measurement problem, arising ultimately out of the uncertainty principle. Which apparently demonstrates that the very measurements that have established and confirmed quantum theory should be impossible. Oxford philosopher of physics David Wallace has argued that this threatens to make quantum mechanics incoherent, which can be remedied only by vastly multiplying worlds. Beyond these domestic problems, there's the failure of physics to accommodate conscious beings. The attempt to fit consciousness into the material world usually by identifying it with activity in the brain, has failed dismally. If only because there is no way of accounting for the fact that certain nerve impulses are supposed to be conscious. Of themselves or of the world. While the overwhelming majority, physically essentially the same, are not. In short, physics does not allow for the strange fact that matter reveals itself to material objects, such as physicists. And then there is the mishandling of time. The physicist Lee Smolin's recent book, Time Reborn, links the crisis in physics with its failure to acknowledge the fundamental reality of time. Physics is predisposed to lose time because its mathematical gaze freezes change. Tense time, the difference between a remembered or regretted past and an anticipated or feared future is particularly elusive. This worried Einstein. In a famous conversation, he mourned the fact that the present tense, now, lay just outside of the realm of science. Recent attempts to explain how the universe came out of nothing which rely on questionable notions such as spontaneous fluctuations in a quantum vacuum, the notion of gravity as negative energy, and the inexplicable free gift of the laws of nature, waiting in the wings for the moment of creation, reveal conceptual confusion beneath mathematical sophistication. They demonstrate the urgent need for a radical re-examination of the invisible frameworks within which scientific investigations are conducted. We need to step back from the mathematics to see how we got to where we are now. In short, to untake much that is taken for granted. Perhaps even more important, we should reflect on how a scientific image of the world that relies on up to 10 dimensions of space and rests on ideas such as fundamental particles that have neither identity nor location. connects with our everyday experience. This should open up larger questions, such as the extent to which mathematical portraits capture the reality of our world, and what we mean by reality. The dismissive, just shut up and calculate, to those who are dissatisfied with the incomprehensibility of the physicist's picture of the universe is simply inadequate. It is time, physicist Neil Turok has said, to connect our science to our humanity. And in doing so, to raise the sights of both. This sounds like a job for a philosophy not yet dead. Not reach the comments there. Let's see if we can find something. Give us a sec here. So we will continue with Neil Turok here, and this is an article from Scientific American. Betting against gravitational waves. Q&As with cosmologist Neil Turok, or Turok. Many physicists were disheartened at the news that the apparent discovery of gravitational waves from the Big Bang was likely an error. But a cosmologist from the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics in Waterloo, Ontario, felt a bit vindicated. Neil Turok has been betting all along that primordial gravitational waves, ripples in the fabric of space-time, would never be seen. Turok expressed little surprise that new results from the Planck satellite observing light from the Big Bang show that the supposed observation of gravitational waves from the South Pole BICEP 2 experiment in March was probably contaminated by a haze of dust in our galaxy. Gravitational waves, if confirmed, would be proof that the baby universe ballooned rapidly just after the Big Bang in a process called inflation. The idea is popular, but it has some vocal opponents, such as Turok, who helped formulate one of the main alternatives to inflation. Scientific American spoke to Turok about the BICEP 2 controversy and how he came to wager with Stephen Hawking against gravitational waves. What does the latest analysis from Planck show? The Planck paper tells us that the entire BICEP 2 signal could be due to dust. This is big news. The only way to distinguish between dust and the kind of signal BICEP 2 was looking for is to look in several frequencies. This was a fundamental problem with the BICEP 2 claim, because they were using only one frequency. Currently, Planck is the only experiment with the capability to look in multiple frequencies. It's taken them some time to do all the necessary analysis. What they find is that the projected contribution from the dust more than accounts for the BICEP 2 measured signal. So what it means is that the simplest explanation of the BICEP 2 results is that they were seeing dust. What does this mean for the idea of inflation, which predicted the gravitational waves? The theory of inflation has dominated cosmology for 30 years. I have been one of the people pointing out its problems and limitations. In my view, it's not a convincing explanation. For the Big Bang. One of its problems is it's very adjustable. It makes very few specific predictions that you could actually go out and check with a measurement. I've been developing a cyclic picture of the universe. According to which the Big Bang is just the latest in an infinite number of cycles going back into the past. In the cyclic picture, there will be Big Bangs in the future. I developed this theory with Paul Steinhardt. We mostly did so in order to show people that there was an alternative to inflation and you didn't have to believe the party line. It turns out the cyclic model predicts zero gravitational waves. If gravitational waves are seen, they will disapprove all the models I've developed. I'm also quite happy to see them disproved. I don't think they are the final answer at all. I also think the cyclic models are too complicated. But these models work every bit as well as inflation in every other aspect. How did you end up making a bet over gravitational waves? People like Stephen Hawking believe that the simplest inflation models, the most plausible ones, would produce enough gravitational waves that we could detect them. I made a bet with Stephen in 2001 that these gravitational waves would not be there. As soon as the BICAP 2 result came out, Stephen told the BBC that he'd won his bet with me. My response was, science requires verification. We never believe the results of one experiment. it needs to be checked. I could see a number of problems with the BICAP2 experiment. Stephen wrote me an email saying, "Don't be a bad loser." He lost $100 on the Higgs boson and had to pay up when it was discovered. I said, I'm not going to pay because I have very serious doubts. I said, I bet you the true signal of gravitational waves is less than a quarter of what BICAP2 is claiming. If it turns out to be even half of what BICAP2 is claiming, I'll pay you up. Do you think you're going to win? I'm halfway to winning my bet. Earlier Planck measurements were indicating the level of gravitational waves is less than half of what BICAP is claiming. The latest measurement from Planck basically make that very solid. All we need to go is another factor of 2 down, and I win my bet with Stephen. I'm hoping that will happen in November because BICAP2 and Planck are working together. BICAP2 is still hoping that when they combine with Planck, they will miraculously detect evidence of gravitational waves together. It might happen, they could be lucky, but in my view, that's wishful thinking. Is all this back and forth about BICAP2 damaging the field? Or is this simply the way science is done? Both. I think a lot of people would take pause at this point and acknowledge there was too much hype about the results, too many claims made, and instead we need to be a little more cautious and scientific and really allow the evidence to be settled. I think the BICAP 2 researchers should have said we found a signal that is very interesting. And future experiments will show what it represents. It could be dust, it could be something else. Actually, I advise them to say that I called them up before the press conference because I'd heard rumors and I advised them to be cautious. Unfortunately, they didn't listen to my advice, and they're probably now wishing they had. In any case, it's pretty normal for science. The universe puts us right. It is just mind-boggling that we are able to make these measurements and that they're telling us something as profound as what happened at the Big Bang. This would have been termed philosophy not that long ago. Now it's real science. What will it mean if there are no primordial gravitational waves? Finding that your whole picture of the Big Bang is obscured by dust is a big negative. But so far, our observations are pointing at this marvelously simple picture. And it's simpler than most of our theories. Our theories are getting more and more arcane and complicated, and the universe is telling us it is just as simple as it can be. I find that wonderful. It means our theories are in doubt, but for the first time there are real clues. Let me continue with an article. It's from an interview from CBC. What's behind the end of physics, Neil Turok? We live in a very pessimistic times in spite of the massive discoveries that are being made. It is one of the great ironies that at the moment where at the time the Large Hadron Collider discovered the Higgs bosons 50 years after it was discovered. When LIGO discovered the gravitational waves from black holes 100 years after they were predicted, when we have mapped the entire visible universe using the Planck satellite, everybody, well, not everybody, some people are wringing their hands and saying, this is the end of science. It couldn't be more absurd. What underlies it, I think, is the fact that to a large extent over the last nearly 100 years, the great revolutionary ideas of the early 20th century have been playing out. To a very large extent, the entire history of physics since the 1900s, the 1910s, the 1920s, it's been more or less working out the consequences of the great ideas of that time, which were relatively, meaning what is space and what is time, and quantum mechanics. The laws of physics, how things works within space-time. And so I think to some extent what these people are expressing is that there haven't been radically new revolutionary ideas. Physics is a pretty conservative field. You know it's about absolutely secure knowledge. That is physics. It's our most secure knowledge. Maybe behind logic, closely behind logic. Logic can be very secure, but it can be irrelevant to the world. Physics is all about the world. Our most secure knowledge about the world about the natural world is physics. I think what people are sort of expressing is that we haven't had a big revolution in physics. String theory was hoped for to be that revolution in the 1980s, but it hasn't really panned out in the sense that it hasn't given a single prediction. Instead, it's given us a huge collection of theories where, if you like, there's no overarching theory to tell which particular version of string theory is the one that describes the world. It is almost self-destructed. I would say because it turned out to be not just one theory, but this vast collection of theories which could give all different descriptions of the world. So I think that sort of theoretical catastrophe, as I view it, meaning the logical pursuit of quantum mechanics and relativity over 100 years, was tremendously successful at some level, but finding its successor theory, it hasn't been successful. I think that it is also laying the ground for some sort of revolutionary change, in the sense that we basically will have to go back to the founding principles. It looks like the founding principles of modern physics, quantum theory and relativity, have played out, and they have not given us the answer we need. And so we have to go back and question those founding principles and find whatever it is, whatever new principle will replace them. So marching these great puzzles posed by the observations are equally great puzzles in our fundamental theories. So that it is just a wonderful thing to contemplate in itself. I mean, partly people become very pessimistic and say, oh my God, I've devoted 50 years of my life to studying this incredibly technical and difficult theory, and now I found its blown up in my face. It's not giving any predictions at all. And so some people talk about the multiverse, where the universe would be wild and chaotic on large scales, and almost anything you can imagine would actually exist somewhere in the universe. I mean, this is literally a scenario which became very popular among a category of physicists. That there is a multiverse out there, yet the evidence is exactly the opposite. That as we look around us, things could not be simpler. There is no evidence for chaos on large scales in the universe. It is totally the opposite. It's pristine, elegance, minimalism is all we see. So I think this is a very, very exciting time to be doing theory. The challenge is enormous. The clues are enormous. We're waiting and we're preparing, and we're encouraging people to take radical leaps. There's a comment here that is quite interesting. Ken Hughes wrote following: there is a basic flaw in our understanding of relativity which ultimately leads to the resolution of many conundrums that still perplex us. Read The Binary Universe. The math of SR is fine, but we have fed into our interpretation of the math the idea that all motion must be purely relative. We have deliberately done this because we are afraid of a preferred reference frame. Please read my book, or we will continue to struggle to make progress in our understanding of the physical world. You can throw it away if you like, but to ignore these ideas presented would be willfully incompetence, quite literally on the cosmic scale. That sounds daring and tempting. I might do that. So the last 30 years we had an absolute majority of thinking that the universe is inflating in a steadily progress. or even in exponentially progress. This has been debated, and it was oddly interesting. I did not know about the wager between Stephen Hawking and Neil Turok. It makes it a bit more interesting. It spiced the whole thing up. And I do not actually at this very instant know who won in the end. Some years has passed. We could possibly know whether it was dust that hit the Planck satellite or not. But this goes to show that the inflationary universe that is in every school book at this time might actually be wrong, and that there are rather a continuum of big bangs and big crunches. Yes, a much more complicated theory, but it fits all the experimentations and observations. We cannot know what lies behind. Yes, we should apply Occam's razor, but applying it preemptively and without finesse is disastrous, because it forces us into a specific way of seeing the world. And once you trodden that path, it is very, very hard to deviate. And this is the second purpose I wanted to bring up. 3 or 4 philosophers / physicists in one go. It shows that, and I think this is undoubtedly so, that we entered into a certain path. I think all can agree that. And we need to be aware of that path. And I'm not even suggesting rejecting it or praising it, but we're not aware of that path. Julian Barber is very well aware of that. He knows the history, he knows where we've gone, and he's happy with that. I'm not too sure. I have my doubts, because the development of this path has too many, my point of view, too many traits of archaic Greek thinking. And my general idea, as you well know, is that that thinking is in itself tainted with certain absolutes, like the subject-object division, never clearly hypothesized, and therefore easily sleeked into the theory of relativity, where it's obviously present, Newtonian classical physics, and into the minds of everyday people. It is very hard to point out, and I'd say Stephen Rosen and Diego Lucio Rappaport makes a very good jump into the before of the establishment of the Greek thinking perception, because it's a perception. I said that many times. Perceptions seem not to be taken into the how can I say, into the thinking or the debate. How do we perceive the world? Because first, it's almost impossible to talk about. I will not say it is absolutely impossible, but it's very, very hard, because perception is not words. The object-subject division is not founded in words. It comes before words, comes before experience even. Therefore, it's one of those things that are very tricky to get around. And we are used to that distinction. It's a habit. It could be a habit that is very hard to break. I would say it's incredibly hard to break. But it's not shared by everyone on this planet. There are obvious proofs that people are not using this distinction in the same way or not in that way at all. But because of our habit that comes before words, we immediately prime ourselves to see that tendency everywhere. And this is why perception is so devious. It's hard to combat. Something that you see in front of you, how can you combat that? It's very hard, but I think it can be done. And a pointer to that is definitely the inflatory universe that is now being challenged by Neil Turok, and almost no school books or instructional notes or any notes on the internet could challenge today. And that is still in words. Think how much harder it would be to challenge perception. I see what I see. Yes. Is that a good way to found reality? Well, if there are no alternatives, you have to. And the Western history of philosophy, there have hardly been any alternatives. We have been stuck with this, and I would say, I would add a second thing. This is consuming energy. It's a derived way of thinking. All of a sudden, we assume the objects before they are let to be present for us. Something pointed out by Heidegger, and oddly enough, also by Edward de Bono. I realize that now. He's using a completely different vocabulary, but take this one. It's been disastrous for humanity to rely solely on contradictions made to keep logic floating. So we start with contradictions, and therefore we are limited by them, instead of using them as knives or other tools. We assume them to be in nature, which is the ontological fallacy that Heidegger calls ontic. I say thank you very much. It was very pleasurable. A very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.